Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm super excited to talk to you guys about my experience reading the Riyria Revelations by Michael J. Sullivan. The second half of the video I will be going into a spoiler-filled chat for those of you that have read the books and want to have a discussion about it. I'm going to be putting in some pretty major spoilers for like the entire trilogy, so don't worry if you don't want to see that. I will definitely put a big flashing sign or something or yell at the camera once I get to that part of the video. Michael J. Sullivan is a pretty well-known name in the fantasy genre, and he has written quite a few books. He started by self-publishing his Riyria Revelations trilogy, which is the story of Royce and Hadrian, who are our two main characters, and I'll go into them a little bit more later. He's also fairly well known for his Legends of the First Empire, which begins with this book Age of Myth, which I have not read yet, but I have it on my TBR because I have heard a lot of people really enjoyed this series. It'll be interesting for me, at least, once I get to this point, to see the difference between the Riyria writings that Michael J. Sullivan has done versus something like this. Today we are going to be talking about the first trilogy in this whole epic saga, and that is the Riyria Revelations, which consists of 3 books, which is Theft of Swords, Rise of Empire, and Heir of Novron. Now, originally, these books were actually split into 6 different volumes, and they were only later combined into these omnibus editions where it was 2 per book. Theft of Swords was originally The Crown Conspiracy and Avampartha. Rise of Empire was originally Nifron Rising and the Emerald Storm. And Heir of Novron was originally Wintertide and Perseplicus. Now, the first book in the omnibus trilogy is Theft of Swords, wherein we meet a pair of mercenary thieves for hire, Royce Melbourne and Hadrian Blackwater. Royce is a small, quick, agile, very intelligent, strategic thief. He's the one that's picking all of the locks and the one that is thinking through the strategies of how to get in and get out. Hadrian is his partner in crime, and Hadrian is a big, very skilled sword fighter. Hadrian carries 3 different swords on him. He is the fastest sword fighter that anyone has ever seen. Basically, we find Royce and Hadrian in the beginning of this story, and they are carrying out these random heist and thievery jobs for different nobles around the country, and they are very, very well known and lauded as basically the most talented pair. Like, if you want something stolen from right out of under a king's nose or something in the most heavily guarded place in the entire country, you're gonna want to call up these 2, but you're gonna have to be prepared for a steep fee. Now, in the beginning of this book, everything is going well until Royce and Hadrian are given a new job, and that is to steal a famous sword from a kingdom in this country. They find themselves framed for murder of the king of this kingdom, and at the very heart of this huge, as the original book is called, Crown Conspiracy, that is an horribly intertangled web of deceit and lies and throne succession and everything else that has a far deeper foundation than even we know in this first book. Along the way, we do get to meet quite a few side characters that kind of fill in the gaps around Royce and Hadrian. We have our friends, we have our enemies, and we have our frenemies, all of the above in this book. And I actually really enjoyed a lot of the side characters in this story. There's a character in here whose name is Myron, and he's a monk who basically has been sheltered in one abbey his entire life. He has no idea what's going on in the world. He is very naive and innocent, and when he ends up crossing paths with Royce and Hadrian, it is absolutely beautiful. Like, these 2 hardened criminals who have made their living thieving, and you know, they've definitely killed some people, and then you have Myron, who is the sweetest little like horse whisperer on the planet, and he just thinks that the world is just the most beautiful, wonderful thing he's ever seen. He's amazed by every little thing, and the 3 of them end up traveling together for a while, and that honestly was probably my favorite part of this entire book. Now, I'm gonna be totally honest, okay? Totally honest. When I read this book very early on this year, I enjoyed it. It was good, but I wasn't sure if I was going to keep reading this trilogy, because a couple of the things that kind of held me up from this. I really enjoyed Royce and Hadrian in this book. I really enjoyed some of the side characters. I felt like the plot kind of seemed a little bit slow isn't exactly the right word. The language used in this book tends to feel more modern, I think, than I'm used to in a lot of other fantasy books. My kitten wanted to say hello. Oh, you look beautiful in that ring light. Can you say hi? So in all honesty, I wasn't sure if I was going to finish this series. I liked it, but I wasn't totally sold on it. I kind of felt like I had to drag myself through a few parts of this, and while I loved Royce and Hadrian and the idea of their partnership of thievery and the bromance that was obviously there, I wasn't getting, I think, as deep of a connection with them as I wanted, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to go through all of this if it was going to be like the same kind of experience. However, I ended up watching a couple of videos where people, other booktubers, other fantasy booktubers who have decidedly more experience reading these trilogies and just fantasy in general than I do, kind of really encouraged people to give the rest of the trilogy a try, because according to them, this trilogy got better with each book, and the ending was really satisfying and really awesome, and Royce and Hadrian just kept getting better and better. I can't even begin to tell you the difference between Theft of Swords and Rise of Empire. I immediately was in at like a 4-star read from the first few chapters. I just felt like this book flowed better. We got way more out of the characters in this book. The side characters were a lot deeper, and everything really felt more cohesive, and it felt more tense, like the stakes were just getting bigger and things really mattered. And Royce and Hadrian, I feel like, were having to make more and more choices that were testing who they thought they were. And that is something that I absolutely love. I love a good anti-hero and reluctant hero combination, which we have in Royce and Hadrian, and it just was so much more fun. So where the first book kind of sort of held my attention, but it didn't make me fall in love with the series, book 2 just solidified everything that I loved in book 1 and expanded on it. And I really didn't feel like this one was a slow read. It didn't feel like I was dragging myself through anything. It was such a good experience. Finally, I got to Heir of Novron, and this one I really didn't waste a lot of time in between Rise of Empire and Heir of Novron, because I wanted to know what had happened, and things were getting a little bit crazier. More people were getting involved. The whole empire is now at stake, and there's a huge focus on push and pull of different religions and how people in power try to cover things up, and people who really have a vested interest in keeping the power that they have will maneuver things in any way they possibly can, and they will take advantage of anyone they possibly can in order to have the best outcome for themselves. Overall, I am so glad. I'm so glad that I decided to continue on with this series. For anybody who's looking for kind of what style this is a really great, accessible fantasy style. This is something that is very easy to read. There are definitely secrets you don't find out until the end of the trilogy, quite a few of them actually, but I really appreciated that I actually had a hard time predicting a couple of things toward the end. Some of the stuff was more predictable. I would say in Theft of Swords, I actually predicted quite a bit of what was going to happen towards it, and that might have something to do with my experience in reading it. But as I went farther along, Michael J. Sullivan kept me guessing until the very end, and that's something that I really appreciate in an author. When you kind of know the answer, which I did, but I kept second guessing myself, and I was like, well, but it could be this other thing or this other person. And I just really enjoyed that experience, and I really didn't know for sure until the last pages of the book. I would also say that the world building in this trilogy is really good. It's very solid. I never wondered what I was looking at. There was enough world building to really keep me immersed in the story, but it didn't it wasn't like this poetic prose that just went on and on for pages. You know, that's not the style that Michael J. Sullivan has. I would highly recommend this for someone especially who maybe has a harder time with really intensely convoluted fantasy series or trilogies. This one is very easy to follow, has really endearing side characters, really defined villains to some degree, and I felt like this was just a really good, solid, accessible fantasy trilogy. Okay, now we're going to talk about some spoilers. So, if you haven't read this trilogy, or you haven't read all of the trilogy, this is the part of the video where I'm going to start talking about some spoilers. So, if you don't want to know and you don't want to be spoiled, here there be dragons. Okay, so let's talk about this, guys. I'm really curious if you have read these books. Please feel free to comment, discuss in the comments below. I'm going to talk about the things I loved and then a few of the things that kind of were questionable. Things that I loved about this whole trilogy. Again, Myron. I'm just gonna throw that out there. Myron. I loved Myron. He brought such a beautiful levity to this series and kind of a reminder that no matter what, there are things of beauty to be found in the world, and he's an optimist, but in like you can't be annoyed at him because he's just so gosh darn precious. I loved the romance between Royce and Gwen. I think Royce and Gwen are far and away the superior romance in this book. Not to say that I didn't like Hadrian and Arista. I just kind of felt like theirs was, it's not that it didn't make sense, it was a slow burn to the point where I think I maybe expected something out of Hadrian and Arista that wasn't necessarily the way the characters were, because they kind of get to the end and when they admit their feelings to each other finally after like spending the entire last book assuming that the other person could never possibly love them, they just kind of fall into it gently. And I think where I might have wanted something a little bit more intense, I think it did a good job of showcasing how tired the characters were. When they finally admit to each other that they're in love, they don't know if they're going to survive or not. And it was just kind of this gentle, I'm happy to be with you at the end of the world sort of vibe, which I like. I do really love Gwen and Royce a lot. I think that the twist at the very end with them and Mercy was very much a beautiful addition. I don't know that I necessarily saw that coming. I was surprised by the fact that Royce and Gwen had a child, but then as soon as I found out, I was like, well, of course, you know, and just the way that Gwen's foresight kind of worked into that was really cool. I appreciated that a lot. It's a very soft magic system in this trilogy, and I actually didn't dislike that. So I really loved the soft imagery of Arista kind of weaving her fingers and having music be part of the magic system. That made total sense, especially where it's elvish in nature. I wanted the elves to be a little different, I think, at the end. They struck me as very classic fantasy elves, you know, like the elves of Lothlorien or whatever had come out of the trees and like in their shining armor and they wanted to find their king. I wasn't mad at it necessarily, but I would have liked to see something a little bit more unique. I think, you know, it does just go to show the contrast of the fact that Royce really doesn't fit into a world like this necessarily, because he doesn't really fit on either side, and I think that was kind of the point of his character. And I'm all over the place today, but in Rise of Empire, when the ship sinks and the entire hold full of elvish prisoners goes down and dies, presumably, Royce didn't really react to that the way that I thought he would. There wasn't even really a mention of it. There was, I think, one part where somebody was like, oh yes, and the ship went down and the elves and whatever, and Royce was just like, yep, Which, like, knowing his character, I definitely felt like he should have had something more than that, especially where he, like, had such a strong reaction to elves being held prisoner or treated in a negative way of any kind. That part was kind of threw me out a little bit just because I wasn't sure why there was literally no reaction from pretty much anyone that the entire ship full of elvish prisoners was gone. And if I'm like totally missing something, please let me know, because it is possible that I just totally missed something in there, but that kind of surprised me. Going back to the third book, I always kind of knew it was going to be Royce. In the back, I mean, did we not all know that? Like, in the back of your heart of hearts, you know it's gotta be Royce, because while Hadrian is like off looking for the heir and trying to think about, I have to protect the heir, and of course he's been protecting the heir the entire time, and of course it's Royce, because who else would it be, and why would it not be someone so totally unsuited to being a elvish king than Royce Melbourne? There was a point I really went back and forth. I really wasn't 100% sure that Michael J. Sullivan was going to go that route until the very end of the book. He did keep me guessing, and I do have to give him credit for that, because while I kind of knew that in the back of my head, I was still looking at everybody else. Like, for a while, I was like, is it Arista? And then I was like, is it Dagon Gaunt's sister? And then I was like, okay, for a while, I was so sure for a little while there it was going to be Myron, because with the Galarabrin, which I think I said that correctly, the dragon, when they got in there and they were supposed to make it calm, I was like, dude, Myron can tame animals. Like, let him in there and let him tame this dragon, and then he's gonna be the heir of Novron, and the dragon's gonna listen to him, and that would be so awesome. So there was definitely a part of me that thought it might be Myron, especially since we really didn't know much about his backstory. And then he meets Elenda, his sister, for the first time, and it's like this total separation of family where her father didn't want her to go visit him, and he just kind of got dumped at this abbey. So I was like, that's pretty sus. But overall, I am definitely not upset at the fact that it was Royce. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it was the more obvious way to take that, but I'm not mad about it. I don't even know if I could pick a favorite. I did really, really like Rise of Empire. I really, really liked it. I'd have to go back at some point and maybe break out the 6 different books and figure out which individual book of the 6 total was my favorite. One other thing that I will say about this trilogy is I did think that the Black Diamond was a really cool concept, and it's very Thieves Guild, you know, almost Lies of Locomora vibes, but I don't think it went far enough. I wanted more from that concept. And Merrick was a little bit of a letdown at the end too, with how much he'd been built up. And I get, like, he's been behind the scenes, he's deadly. But then as soon as he comes face to face with Royce, who has just lost Gwen, obviously he is not as scary as he is behind the scene. My kitten's back. Hello, what are you doing? I would have maybe liked to see a little bit more with the Black Diamond and some of that in general. But I'm guessing that there's going to be a lot more of that in the Riyria Chronicles, which I am planning on reading, because who doesn't want more Royce and Hadrian and the origin story. But I would love, love, love to know what you think of this trilogy, characters, etc. in the comments below, so feel free to leave your thoughts. And yeah, that's mine. So I hope you guys are all having a fantastic week, and I will see you in the next video.